His tone shifts while the camera is already rolling. Thus far, it seems like yet another recap, yet another chaotic online scenario. The air in the room suddenly abruptly changes. His eyes tighten, his shoulders slant forward, and he addresses her directly rather than the audience, Tamar, not as an outsider.
Are you aware of what really happened to you?
No, I'm not.
Or can you talk about what
I can
happened?
talk about it, but I'm not aware of what really happened to me.
Not as a headline, as a person he used to consider a friend. He goes there after a little gap that is just long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. I'm telling you to your damn face, you were a bold-faced, bald-headed goddamn liar. He replies calmly. On social media, the video freezes on that frame. His eyes were tight, with a mixture of tiredness and pain, and his jaw was set. The audio from Tamar's own interview, in which she insists she doesn't know what actually happened to her that night. Only that she went to a friend's birthday party. And gave a friend a birthday party, is repeatedly looped by fans, stitched into reaction videos, slowed down and rewound. One night, two stories, and an increasing awareness that they cannot both be true in the same manner. On the one hand, Tamar gently informs L'Oreal that she doesn't know what actually happened, dismissing the specifics as if they were too hazy to remember. On the other hand, he claims that Funky's retracing every step restaurant and vehicle journey creates a timeline that shows the story she's telling is not only unfinished but well-crafted. The interpretations proliferate along with the video. Some viewers argue that this is the point at which the mask comes off, because his annoyance seems too particular and detailed to be written off as a random internet mess. Others maintain that he's not being truthful and that his feelings are distorting the facts. A bigger question begins to emerge somewhere in the middle. Is Tamar refuting his account or unintentionally confirming the details she omitted when she refers to that evening as a birthday celebration she hosted? Because one unsettling idea keeps coming up in the comments behind the jokes, memes, and dragging. Why does his account sound so accurate if she truly can't recall what happened? People's perceptions of the video change as soon as he speaks. What started out as an ugly public dispute now feels like the first file of a deeper case, where facts and emotions conflict in unanticipated ways rather than moving together. Every twitch on his face is captured by the camera. This isn't
walking Mendeecees and his homeboy. Okay. Now, this is the third time that me and you have been hanging out, and out of nowhere, here comes Mendeecees. Okay. Now you can make of that whatever the hell you want.
Isn't performative rage. Rather, it's something more substantial, developed over time, and carried by him long before he hit record. He lets out a single breath to stabilize himself, and the video rolls into the scene that causes the internet to freeze. It's when he reiterates Tamar's own statement to her. It's almost as if he's evaluating the facts. Tamar stating that she is not aware of what really happened to her in her interview. She speaks in a way that is almost too composed for someone recounting a night that supposedly left her frightened. She doesn't wince, she doesn't break her voice. She simply states it. And many observers find that poise to be either commendable or suspicious. He believes it to be the latter. The instant those lines are played, his countenance tightens. He sees this as manipulation rather than amnesia. Story is being formed, and he starts the careful, painstaking dissection of the night that they both said at that point. It's just his idea of a timeline that he says she keeps changing, not an outrageous conspiracy or a shocking accusation. And what draws readers into the narrative is the tension of that struggle. He describes how she was not planning a birthday celebration for him. He claims that she called him to see what was open in his area because she and her pals were just hungry. He clarifies that he recommended a dining establishment. They concurred. And that, in his opinion, was the real reason for the evening, rather than some extravagant move she made on camera. His narration has a subtle intensity. It was almost like an investigator touring a crime scene. He was already familiar with not hurried, not sentimental. The phone call, the closed eateries, XOs. Arrival, the known faces, and the anticipated energy all seem intentional. Nothing out of the ordinary yet. However, a change occurs in the timeline. He talks about how his companion and Mendeecees got to the eatery, surprisingly without being included in the initial strategy. Even if he carefully selects his remarks, it is clear that this wasn't a coincidence. This was not a casual visit. This was prearranged. The internet quickly picks up on that point. Commenters slow down the video, analyzing the language, the pauses, and the way he says out of nowhere. For others, this sounds like jealousy.
Which you went to the internet, you said you woke up in a pool of blood and almost died. In this interview with L'Oreal, you mentioned that you were home with David or somebody, and they said we need to call an ambulance. And
Sounds to others like someone who saw a pattern long before it was made public. And an increasing number of viewers believe it to be the first genuine break in the story that Tamar presented, because the discrepancy between their accounts became its own form of proof after she revealed to the world that she had thrown a party for him, and he responded by outlining every reason why that was false. The tone increases.
the problem with this whole thing was, Tamar, is that I was never comfortable with the relationship that you and Mendeecees had in front of me. Okay, all of that.
Is when he talks about how he didn't want to travel to the next site and only dragged himself there because the group insisted. It doesn't sound like a man who is eager to celebrate. It sounds like someone who had an uneasy feeling but lacked the vocabulary to express it. Additionally, there is a moment when more people pause the video than any other. Tamar says she gave a friend a birthday party. He responds to this section in a way that is nearly forensic. He explains why he finds this line problematic.
Damn car and went home because you was sitting on his lap in that goddamn Uber and y'all ass was kissing. Okay, and the shit made me damn uncomfortable. Okay, now if anybody know who happened,
It doesn't seem like a harmless exaggeration to him. It's a fabrication intended to deflect criticism, elicit compassion, and lead the public to believe that he mistreated her on a night she planned for him, whether or not viewers concur with him. One thing is evident. Tamar's wording allows for interpretations that she may not have intended, because she presents herself as the giving person when she adds, "I gave a friend a birthday party." The victim who received betrayal in return, the encouraging friend who is offended by the person she honored. And it's a gripping tale on its own. However, the story ceases to be a story as soon as his version walks into the room. It's a dispute. There are two opposing timelines, two irreconcilable facts, and the audience must decide between them. This is where the story starts to take on a suspenseful tone, not via peril or violence, but rather through uncertainty, the kind that causes you to doubt intentions, choices, and recollections, the kind that gives the impression that silence is more powerful than words. Then he adds a layer of emotional pain, which makes everything more profound. He acknowledges that he wants things to return to their previous state. He acknowledges that he didn't want any of this to occur. He acknowledges that he is lamenting the loss of a friendship he once cherished, and yet, that vulnerability turns into the most disturbing aspect of it all. Because it's more difficult to write someone off as merely sloppy or malevolent when they express such a degree of disappointment. The internet starts to develop theories. Tamar is allegedly deflecting. He is overreacting, according to some. Others think that each of them are speaking the truth as they perceive it, and that the true tale is somewhere in the space where those truths intersect. However, the mention of feeling uneasy while seeing Tamar and Mendeecees' interactions is the next revelation that completely alters the tone. He makes no accusations, he makes no factual claims. He merely expresses discomfort, the type that results from noticing something subtle, unsaid or impossible to prove, but impossible to ignore. Suddenly, there are a ton of questions in the comment. section that Tamar didn't address during her interview. The emotional weight in his voice implies that there is more to the narrative than either of them wants to acknowledge. Not because he made any specific accusations against her, the stakes increase once further when he links that unease to the story she publicly shared, which he claims was intended to portray him as the antagonist. Because the story isn't. It's about a birthday celebration at all, if both timelines are accurate in their own right. It has to do with perception, accountability, and the ability to create a story before the other person has a chance to speak.
To her for her foot, yes. Thank you. Bye. And the whole issue.
However, one question now controls everything. Did Tamar unintentionally divulge more information than she meant to, or did she oversimplify the tale to protect herself? As the night of the incident starts to expand into something far more complicated than a misunderstanding, that uncertainty stays weighty and unsolved. The entire tone of the video changes once the pain is brought up. The unsaid dynamics in the room that evening, the slight glances people claim to have noticed, and the way some things line up a bit too neatly when placed next to one another become more important than merely two opposing stories. Every frame of the time frame he describes is paused by the internet, which looks for meaning even in cases where it isn't provided, because his statement that he was never comfortable with Tamar and Mendeecees' interactions is not made lightly. It has a weight to it, a heaviness that implies this was a pattern rather than a single instance. And viewers focus on the tension between the lines in slow-motion edits that enthusiasts make online. There is no direct statement made. There is no proof. However, the suggestion is sufficient to spark conjecture on its own. And one clip repeatedly appears after that. His statement that he feels uneasy about Tamar and Mendeecees' relationship, although it's brief.
Paint me as the messy faggot. I'll be that. I will be the messy faggot that everybody should stay away from on Get Mad Day because he gonna tell all your business. I had been told this lady to leave me alone. But
the way it's delivered gives the impression that someone has been holding something within 4 months. With Tamar's ambiguous claims that he doesn't know what happened that night, the internet takes that moment and runs with it, generating threads attempting to match his uneasiness. The gaps get wider the more people compare the interviews, and rumors begin to take shape within those spaces, between what she says and what he portrays. He describes how the party traveled from one place to another, expressing his hesitation at each stop. On their own, the details: restaurants closing, pals choosing their next destination, someone recommending a different location are not particularly dramatic. However, his reticence becomes a signal in and of itself. He had no desire to stay up.
And granted, there is a world where people can say, well, Q, I get it. Some people did not know until I addressed it. But for the record, she went out
up late. He was unwilling to change places, was unwilling to get out of his car. Every move felt like a choice that the group, or more especially her, had forced onto him. This is significant because it portrays the remainder of the evening as something he was forced into, something that didn't feel natural to him at first, rather than as a celebration. A fresh tension is created by that subtle change in tone. Was Tamar attempting to set up a story before daylight even arrived? He then brings up the scene that sends viewers into a tailspin. The journey by automobile, not the final destination, but the dynamic within that car. He claims that by the time they arrived at Tamar's house, she wasn't sitting by herself in the back seat. She wasn't aloof. After a hard night, she wasn't half asleep. According to his description, she was perched on Mendeecees' lap, and they were sharing a kiss. The internet explodes with that detail because she described their relationship as casual, limited, and harmless earlier in the chronology, implying that she hardly knew him. However, this is an entirely different image, not from a blog or a stranger, but from someone who claims to have been in the same car and witnessed the exchange from just inches away. Fans start analyzing intentions at this point. Why would she minimize the bond in front of the camera? If the energy in the car suggested otherwise, why would she present the evening as a celebration for a friend? And since the events leading up to it were supposedly so intimate, why would? She'll say she didn't know what happened. The transcript doesn't address any of these queries. However, their presence speaks louder than any verification. He did not, however, accuse her of any misconduct. He makes no firm claims about what transpired upstairs. Rather, he concentrates on the reasons behind his decision. He didn't accompany her upstairs because, according to him, he thought they desired seclusion. He felt that whatever was happening between them was more important to the night than he was. That distinction turns into a pivotal moment in the story, because viewers begin to wonder if her interview was ever intended to clarify anything, or if it was designed to conceal something else entirely once he discloses that he was excluded from the plot she publicly created around him. This brings up the section of the transcript that seems more like proof than analysis. His statement about choosing to return home after witnessing them in the car, he doesn't yell. He doesn't make things up. He just expresses his choice. He returned home. She headed upstairs. He wasn't present. He is unaware of what transpired next, because it defies the public's preconceived notions about his involvement. That acknowledgement is what causes the internet to go forward. People blamed him when she claimed online that she was hurt when she woke up. He was dragged by others, was accused by others. However, he claims that he wasn't even there when any of that occurred. A fresh emotional depth is introduced when he talks about being accused even though he wasn't present. He is lamenting the way the story selected him as a villain before he had a chance to react, rather than merely defending himself. And viewers inadvertently start to see the flaws in Tamar's rendition at this point. Because consistency is just as important to storytelling as facts. And viewers find it more difficult to reconcile someone who says she doesn't know what happened with someone else, providing a detailed timeline that runs counter to her account of the evening. The information on the phone calls at V12 then follows. He was questioned by several individuals about why she was perched on Mendeecees' lap. He saw the same dynamic being seen by several people. Several folks were reportedly perplexed by what they were witnessing. He leaves that up in the air. Doesn't force it. He merely brings it up, and the sentence's restraint gives it greater impact. The more he talks, the more it becomes clear that he isn't attempting to reveal secrets. He is attempting to protect himself from a story that he feels was intended to hurt him. At this point, viewers start to think about the unsettling idea that both of them might be speaking the truth as they perceive it. But only one of them is admitting the entire timeline, because something emotional emerges when he eventually admits that he regrets taking this route, and that it contributes to the perception of him as messy. He is conscious of how this appears. He is aware that this will be used to portray him as problematic. However, he continues to feel that his truth is more important than that. Danger, and another online rift is caused by that vulnerability. Some claim he manipulates people's feelings. Others think Tamar was the first to alter hers, and a sizable portion of them think the truth is hidden between their tails, entangled in situations that neither of them chooses to explicitly discuss. However, the most explosive moment is still to come. The one in which he distances himself from the night's events and assigns blame to the public narrative she crafted. And everything that follows has a different tone as a result of that turn, because the entire conflict changes from a private dispute to a public reckoning once he asserts that he was the collateral damage in her story. However, the more fundamental query is still unanswered, unacknowledged, and unresolved. Why didn't her specifics match the period he provided if she really thought he had harmed her? And why did her tale portray him that way if she didn't think so at all? These are the questions that will cast a shadow over the upcoming events. The ones that turn the tension from private disputes into widespread public repercussions. The change takes place in silence. At first, it was nearly too quiet for people to hear. The story becomes more complex when he shifts from reporting events to explaining impact. Because up until this point, viewers were attempting to decipher what had transpired by putting together time frames and body language. However, the transcript now delves into the aftermath, particularly after the internet began responding to Tamar's initial allegations. And the core of it is contained in a single statement that becomes louder as more people see the video. She posted on social media that she nearly died after waking up in a pool of blood. Just the phrase nearly died serves as the narrative's emotional center. When she originally stated it, the internet erupted, as watchers recall. Numerous accounts reposted her statement, adding dramatic modifications, threads, hypotheses, and condolences to the comments area. However, at the same time, a sinister undertone started to emerge. Because her account omitted the names of the other people who had been there earlier that evening. He made it very apparent that he wasn't with her when she went upstairs, even if he didn't deny that they were together prior to the incident. And he quietly, almost coldly, repeats it. Nevertheless, others filled in the blanks with him in the center because of how ambiguous her early public remarks were. He sensed it right away. He sounds like someone who just realized the internet had picked a villain before ever hearing his side of the story when he talks about the uproar. The allegations and the presumptions. This is the point at which one of the interview footage reappears with fresh significance. Where he says Tamar claimed she nearly died, his description of it sounds less like incredulity and more like someone who has witnessed the facts distorted and stretched online until it no longer matches what actually occurred. He challenges her, framing rather than accusing her of lying. Why would someone make such a bold statement without making it clear who wasn't there? Why did we allow the world to believe that he was involved in this story? The internet erupts once again when he discloses that someone genuinely offered calling an ambulance that evening, and that she purportedly declined. With mistrust this time with inquiries rather than consolation. He highlights the contrast with tiredness rather than animosity. When he reiterates that fact, there's a weight in his voice, as though he's reliving the same moment he heard it. The strength of her earlier accusation is contradicted by her refusal to accept the ambulance. It leaves a gap that is too big for casual viewers to overlook. And hypotheses are encouraged by gaps. Fans begin creating their own timeline logs at this point. Threads attempting to match the logistical precision of his story with the emotional drama of hers abound on message boards. Thus, it becomes impossible to ignore the tension between the two storylines, regardless of whose side viewers choose. Then comes the part of the transcript that completely changes the tone. When he starts talking about how she supposedly molded her story, while abandoning him to deal with the fallout on his own, he highlights how she went online and caused a media frenzy that engulfed all contexts. Thousands awaited his words. Thousands conjectured. He didn't even know what had happened, so when he finally went live to defend himself, he was unable to provide clarification. He wasn't present, cute, and the pressure simply increased as a result. The most startling part, however, is when he says that she refused to tell people he did nothing even after he asked her explicitly. Then the following day, she removed what she had finally posted. People react differently to that part, since removing anything isn't neutral. It implies uncertainty, or reluctance, or remorse, or tactic. The act alone changes the entire story, but the transcript doesn't explain why she erased it. Why delete the explanation if she was positive he wasn't involved? Why even talk if she wasn't sure? And why let the internet think he might be the reason if she was attempting to shield someone else? The number of queries keeps growing, he laments. What the silence cost him rather than attacking her. He talks about getting accused for stuff he doesn't know about and being dragged online. However, It's the most intense moment, the one that reverberates through every reaction video and conversation thread when he admits that. In his opinion, neither he nor she was the only one who was actually harmed by all. Of this, it was delicious. Tension rises once more at this point. Not because he provides specifics, but rather because he alludes to a dynamic that goes beyond the actual night. He implies that emotional betrayals, hidden links, and ramifications were not adequately addressed. At this point, viewers start drawing connections between this latter emotional repercussions and the transcripts. Earlier references to interactions between Tamar and Mendeecees. He doesn't go into further detail, though. He allows the ripples naturally form after dropping the line into the water like a stone. The rest is done by the internet. Every expression is freeze-framed by reaction channels, which examine each pause. Is what he's saying a figure of speech, or something more profound? Does he mean something more concrete, like emotional betrayal? His weariness speaks louder than the transcript. It's a man who feels deceived twice. Once by her account, and once by the public's propensity to accept it. On social media, there are threads contrasting his and her accounts of the evening. The differences get bigger. The questions remain unanswered. Suddenly, the story isn't about a single night. Instead, it's about perception, accountability, and the peril of ambiguity when a whole internet audience fills in the blanks. This section's final interview moment puts more strain on the discrepancies, where he claims she caused a media frenzy. Without his consent, the accusation's seriousness is only increased by the delivery's composure. Narrative wrongdoing, not factual misconduct. Emotional transgression, reputational harm. It becomes evident when he speaks that this isn't exposure or retaliation. This person felt imprisoned in a narrative he did not write, portrayed in a way he was unable to change, and held accountable for something he was not there to see. And this contributes to the growing concern that viewers have at this point. How much of the truth is still concealed between the lines if neither of them is providing the whole story? How much is lost in the quiet? How much is left unsaid in private? When he accepts the position she purportedly created for him, the messy one, the loud one, the one who speaks the truth when pushed too far, that question becomes the driving factor behind the next escalation. However, neither of them fully expected the expense of that duty. The pivotal moment appears subtly, nearly hidden in the cadence of his voice. He changes into something sharper, sort of resigned clarity after describing the pressure, the guilt, and the quiet. Although the volume of the transcript doesn't increase, the intensity grows. He starts to accept the part he now has to play, the part he claims she forced him into by not changing the plot she created. Viewers notice a greater darkening of the tone during this change. As though the camera is getting closer and the lights are going down, he is now unraveling the night's effects rather than the night itself. He brings up the individuals who got in touch with him and claimed that she must have been acting inappropriately just because they witnessed her actions in public. However, he frames those findings as evidence of the misunderstanding he was put into, rather than using them to condemn her. It wasn't his tale. It wasn't his story. However, he was forced into it against his choice. The internet takes advantage of this notion, not because it validates anything, but rather because it shows how powerful a single vague phrase can be when it is magnified across thousands of screens. And then there's another interview moment that fans frequently point to as the conflict's emotional turning point, where he claims she portrayed him as having mistreated her. Even though he thinks he was the collateral damage, the language is quiet, yet unmistakably hefty, like a low-frequency vibration. People read into the delay that follows the phrase collateral as they repeatedly recite it. He sounds hurt, according to some. Others comment that he seems relieved to let go of everything he's been holding inside. And some think the incident reveals a long-standing pattern of miscommunication between prominent personalities and the narratives they create online. In addition to their personal struggle, from this point on, the tension extends beyond the two of them. In the developing drama, the concept of reputational, emotional, and relational harm takes on a life of its own. He clarifies that he had repeatedly told her to leave him alone in public, stressing that he wasn't like the people in her immediate vicinity, that is, he wasn't the kind to remain silent or back down when challenged, declaring boundaries in the present. It's a shift from narrating the past. The transcript delves into his self-perception at this point. He describes himself as messy, but in a dejected manner, as though he's taking back a persona she imposed on him. Viewers start arguing over whether this is self-awareness or self-defense. In any case, the result is clear. The story is reframed as a conflict between perceived betrayals and intentions. The section of the transcript that shatters audience reactions once more follows. He describes how, despite his requests, she declined to address the inaccurate notions the internet had about him. He describes how, after posting her correction, she removed it. Additionally, his tone conveys sadness rather than rage when he describes the effect that quiet had on him. He implies that she prioritized theatrics above reality in that silence, involvement rather than clarity. Story over camaraderie. At this point, the video switches from narrating events to examining the psychology that underlies them, at least from the viewpoint of the audience. Fans start contrasting her vague remarks with his particular timeline. They start to question whether the discrepancies in her account were deliberate or unintentional. And the question becomes a source of tension in and of itself, because the transcript never provides a direct response. He then reveals the information that causes a stir on social media. He claims she relished the publicity, naturally, as someone used to the limelight, but not maliciously. And it hurt him even more that she was reluctant to explain the facts because of that. Pleasure. The notion that she permitted the miscommunication because it temporarily helped her causes a rift in the audience that is more profound than any prior one. All of a sudden, it's not simply about who was telling the truth. It turns into a motivational issue. Perception, priorities. This is strengthened by another interview reference. When he says she had thousands of people waiting but failed to change, the public perception, the pictures are unsettling. He was crushed in real time by the thousands of people who watched and waited for a revelation that never materialized. Instead, there was a blank filled with conjecture. He reiterates that he was not present, that he went home, and that he had no idea what had transpired. And those specifics serve as the cornerstones of his defense. However, her silence casts a shadow over everything. However, he never directly accuses her of having malevolent intent, which is why this part of the transcript is so nuanced. Rather, he is constantly perplexed by her decisions, bewilderment at the inconsistencies, bewilderment over why her version of events necessitated his involvement at all. The internet attentively examines this trend. Why let the world assume otherwise? If she had no cause to suspect he was involved? And if she did think he was connected, why not state it outright rather than hinting at it? No response appears. Rather, he draws attention to the contradiction between her dramatic statements and the lack of urgency in her actions on the night she claims she nearly died, which heightens the tension. His query about why she didn't contact the police or medical authorities is one of the most often repeated lines in the transcript. His remark is interpreted by viewers as a challenge to the authenticity of her framing, not necessarily to the veracity of her experience, to the story that is constructed around it. And his concluding remarks about not being a member of her support system, not being reliant on her, and not needing her emotionally or financially provide a fresh perspective on the reasons behind his speech. He presents himself as someone who is immune to her power and cannot be subdued. It redefines their dynamic and is a proclamation of independence. Then, with an abrupt change that seems almost dramatic in its timing, he identifies Yandi as the sole person who was actually harmed, not explained in detail, not clarified, just said. and the words themselves are drowned out by the quiet that ensues. After that line, the transcript immediately moves on, but viewers never do. That name, that moment, and that suggestion are all frozen in time. Because it implies that the two individuals at the heart of the dispute were not the only ones affected emotionally. That's when the suspense, like to that of a documentary, peaks not in what was proven, but in what was left unsaid, in the voids that exist between his words, in the inconsistencies between his timeline and her account, in the unresolved issues of silence, concealment, motivation. One thing becomes evident as the video gets closer to the end. The conflict was never about the actual night. It concerned who was in charge of the story later on, who influenced the narrative that the world read, who profited from the uncertainty, and who had to deal with the fallout from a tale they didn't write. The understanding that even now, though with his words clearly spoken, the complete truth is still concealed behind the portions that neither party chose to disclose is the tension that permeates the final reflection. When the video ends, the suspense doesn't go away, because each viewer is left with a different version of the truth based on the holes they choose to fill. In many respects, it only gets sharper in the silence that follows. There is a vacuum between them that neither of them is ready to define. With his timeline on one side and her hazy account on the other, that's precisely where the ideas proliferate, the conjecture intensifies, and the public suddenly finds itself posing more challenging queries regarding the construction, defense, and weaponization of narratives, and you now have control over the entire scenario. You've heard the inconsistencies. You've seen how his version withheld details while hers just included bits. You've seen how he talked about being held accountable, how he questioned her quiet, and how he implied that she relished the limelight while the internet tore him apart. However, you've also observed how her framing opened up a wide range of possibilities, perhaps deliberate, perhaps inadvertent, perhaps something completely different. Now, the true question is, what do you think? Do you believe that she unintentionally confirmed more than she intended to? Were the discrepancies the inevitable outcome of confusion and disorder? Or did they show gaps in the narrative? Was his speech motivated by truth, frustration, or emotional weariness? And what does it signify that Yandi's name appeared at the very end, seemingly looming over everything that was left unsaid? Please share your opinions here. In a story based on innuendo and silence, every viewpoint counts. To ensure you don't miss what happens next, make sure you enjoy this video, hit the bell, and subscribe for the next installment. Because the story is more than just what they said. If this transcript has taught us anything, it's what they wouldn't say.